You are the salt of the earth. This, our Lord spoke to us, his disciples. And today, I want to reflect a little bit on the various aspects of salt so that we can understand a little bit more concretely, hopefully, what our Lord means when he tells us, his disciples, you are the salt of the earth, what he is calling us to. It's one of the first aspects of salt that is probably lost a little bit on us in the 21st century is the fact that salt was in and of itself valuable. It wasn't just simply something that provided value, it was currency in the ancient world. In fact, the word salary, which is how a company or our place of work defines the value we provide to a place of business, the word salary itself has a direct correlation and connection with the word salt. It comes from the Latin word salarium, which means salt money. And this salt money was there in the ancient world, particularly in ancient Rome. Soldiers, when they would come back from a campaign, would be paid in salt. That was their salary. And so when our Lord says, you are the salt of the earth, he's first and foremost making a statement about you and I, his disciples. It's not even so much a call as much as it is a statement of truth, that you and I are in and of ourselves valuable. Not that we necessarily provide a value by anything we do, but that by just living, we are valuable. In the eyes of God, we are precious. In the eyes of God, we are worthy. And so when Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, he's affirming our value, an intrinsic value that we receive in our human dignity from God. Another aspect of salt is that it preserves. And so we know that there's, the main ingredient for pretty much any preservative today is sodium or salt. And since time immemorial, salt has been also that thing that specifically preserves meat. And so what it's doing is preserving it, giving it longevity, right? So that it is preserved and can last longer. So when our Lord says that you and I are salt for the earth, we are called to be agents of preservation, agents of longevity. And what are we preserving and giving longevity to is first and foremost God's grace, that prolonged activity of God's help and aid that he bestows upon us in creation. That we are to be agents of making sure that that grace and that aid is always visible and is always active in us. And that we're to preserve the good things beyond that God does bestow on creation. And one I want to highlight in particular is that of God's love. That of God's love. And that love is founded, and its source is that internal dynamic, that internal relationship of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, that eternal gift of self to one another within the Trinity. And that is imaged and preserved and given longevity through the vocation, most especially, of marriage. That love, that bond of God that he invites us into is preserved and given longevity through the sacrament of marriage and family, and beyond that, and by extension, through friendship. That through marriage and friendship and relationship, we are called to be agents of preservation, preserving these great gifts of God that he gives us and bestows upon all of his creation. Also, as we know, salt, it cleanses and it heals. It's a sort of like disinfectant. And in fact, if you Google healing uses or cleansing uses of salt, you'll come up with an insane amount of uses or ways in which salt is useful as a cleansing agent or a healing agent. And just to name a few, salt, it used to be used in a lot of kitchenware to break up grease, to clean it of grease. It's used along with other ingredients actually to polish and cleanse brass. It's one of the main ingredients, as we know, in cleansing agents like contact lens solution. And as we were reminded this week, salt, rock salt especially, is a great cleaning agent of snow. It melts snow for us, thanks be to God. And certainly in healing it, or a disinfectant, it's good actually to gargle a little bit of salt water if you have like a sore throat. And so when our Lord says that you are salt of the earth, he's calling us to be sources of cleanliness or purity and sources of healing in our community and families. Guys, we need to be, right now, that's a great need, sources of purity and healing. Purity because in the 20th and 21st century, we have had such an increase in kind of the lowering of our gaze as we look at one another and the human person, and specifically the human body. That there's been such an increase of the objectification of the human body that we look oftentimes at one another as objects of pleasure only for me, and lust and unchastity, this uncleanliness of the human gaze that we're all susceptible to, and that we must be these sources of purity, calling others and especially ourselves to raise our gaze, to look at the human person and the human body for what we and it is, sons and daughters of God, to raise our gaze and be sources of purity as well as being sources of healing. We look around our nation and our community, our local communities, and the conversation and the vitriol that happens in how we talk to one another or we talk about one another. People we know or people we've never met in our entire life. And there is an incredible amount of seeds sown for division. Whether it be family members, friends, acquaintances, politicians we've never met in our life. How we talk about one another. And when our Lord says, you are salt of the earth, he is telling us to not engage in that, but rather to be seeds of healing, to sow seeds of healing and unity and peace and harmony in how we talk about one another. Also, salt, as we know, and probably the one we're most familiar with, is a spice. And so salt has always been used as a spice, something to add zest to food, to the taste, to enhance the taste of food. And so when our Lord says, you are salt of the earth, he's calling us to enhance the lives around us, to be a Christ-centered zest that enhances the lives around us. And we do that, one, by ensuring that our lives are marked with joy, that they are marked with good humor, that we provide and are sources of laughter, that our lives are marked by beauty and participating in God's beauty. And that we enhance the lives around us by inviting others into that life, into our life, my life, and your life. And so one is just that enhancing of lives around us by inviting others into our life. And then two, through works of charity, kind of going outside of our own personal lives, doing good works, ministering to the poor and the marginalized, showing great concern, in fact, a preferential concern for those in our communities that are poor, for those in our communities that are struggling, for those in our communities that are marginalized. And by showing that preferential concern for them, we are able to fulfill that bidding of our Lord to enhance their living, to enhance their life. We are, as his disciples, and he spoke this to us today. You and I are salt of the earth. We are in and of ourselves valuable, precious, and worthy in God's eyes. And nothing and no one, no thought of our own or anyone else's opinion can take that or strip that from us. We are to provide longevity and preservation to the good things that God does bestow on creation. We are to be a source and agents of purity and healing in our community, and we are certainly called to be that zest and enhancement to the lives around us. We are the salt of the earth. And we get to continue to be that kind of salt and fulfill those uses of salt so long as we deepen our connection to our Lord, and that we commit to, in all things, follow his will, or, in other words, to follow those uses, those good uses of salt. Because the moment we stop deepening that connection, the moment we lose our connection with Christ, the source of life, as we know, there is a whole other use of salt. Salt kills. It deadens. It can be an agent of death. By stripping away, by sucking all moisture and dehydrating ground or bodies or animals or any living organism, it can become an agent of death. It can kill. And when we lose our connection with the source of life, Jesus Christ, when we stop deepening that connection, we become that kind of salt. That kind of salt that sucks life out of, that dehydrates people of their happiness. And rather than becoming sources of enhancement and purity and cleanliness, and healing, we become agents of objectification. We become agents and sources of cynicism and selfishness and ego and pride. And we are not that. Our Lord spoke this to his disciples. You and I are salt of the earth. You and I are called to be salt of the earth. And no matter what, we will be salt of the earth. But we will not be that source of death, that source and use of salt that sucks life out of. Whether we will be that salt that is a source of value in the lives of others, that is a source of enhancement and zest for life, that is a source of purity and healing, longevity, and preservation. May we always be salt for the earth according to the intentions of our Lord.